The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's safe to say, had a great 2020 season as they won the Super Bowl. And this team is, of course, is just amazing. And in today's video, let's just talk about what's next for them and what they should do in the offseason. Before we do get started though, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed, as it really helps out the channel. Subscribe if you guys are new so you do not miss out on any new videos. Plus, we are on the road to 500 subscribers, and once we hit our goal, I will do a reaction to my first 2 videos ever, plus a Q&A. But with that being said, let's get this video started. Now I want to start out by talking about the Buccaneers roster, and Tom Brady is the very first player I want to talk about. And Tom Brady, I don't have to say much about him. I mean, obviously, many people view him as the greatest player of all time in NFL history, and he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, even at this age. In this past season, he passed for 4,633 yards, 40 touchdowns, and completed 66% of his passes. Up next, let's talk about Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette was not amazing in the regular season, but he's still a really solid player and was very good for them in the playoffs. And there's a good chance that, who knows if they do bring him back. I mean, obviously free agency, it kind of has started and all. But hey, this past season, he had 367 yards and 6 touchdowns. Ronald Jones is the next player I want to talk about. Ronald Jones, he was the starting running back for a majority of the year, I believe. But yeah, Ronald Jones was a very big part of their championship run. And all I can say is that he's going to be a very good player for them in the future. In this past season, he had 978 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns. Up next, let's talk about Mike Evans. Mike Evans is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and it was obviously a really big part of why this team won the Super Bowl, and he had a great year with 1,006 yards and 13 touchdowns. Chris Godwin is the next player I want to talk about, and Chris Godwin, he did miss 4 games and wasn't quite as good as his 2019 self, but even then, he was still, he had a stacked receiving core around him, so he wasn't going to get targeted every play, and he's still a very good player. In this past year, he had 840 yards and 7 touchdowns. Rob Gronkowski is the next player I want to talk about. And Rob Gronkowski, he wasn't absolutely godly and, wasn't like putting up prime Gronk numbers, but he still had a decent year with 623 yards and 7 touchdowns. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, I want to talk about Ndamukong Suh. Ndamukong Suh is not the same player he once was, but Ndamukong Suh, he played a very big role in the Buccaneers winning the Super Bowl, and he still had a decent year with 6 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 29 pressures. Up next, let's talk about Jason Pierre-Paul. Jason Pierre-Paul is still getting up there in age, but he's still a really productive player. He's just really good. I don't have much else to say about him. He had 9.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, and 22 pressures this past year. Devin White is the next player I want to talk about, and Devin White, he is quickly becoming one of the best linebackers in the NFL. He made another large leap in his game, and all I can say is that he is just a great player. This past season, he had 9 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 4 passes defended, and 20 pressures. Lavonte David is the next player I want to talk about, and Lavonte David is one of the most underrated linebackers in the NFL. He's a very good coverage linebacker and had 1 interception and 6 passes defended this past season. Up next, let's talk about Shaq Barrett. Shaq Barrett is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, and while he didn't have a 19.5 sack season, we can't exactly expect him to post 19.5 sacks every year, but he still had 8 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 42 pressures. Carlton Davis is the next player I want to talk about, and Carlton Davis actually had a pretty decent year and is a very underrated and solid cornerback and had 4 interceptions and 18 passes defended this past year. And to really wrap up this roster, Anton Winfield Jr. is the final player I want to talk about. And Anton Winfield Jr., he actually had a really good rookie season with 1 interception, 6 passes defended, and 3 sacks. Now, the Buccaneers have a really good team. We all know that. There's a reason why they won the Super Bowl. Of course, they don't have a lot of weaknesses, so they do not have a lot of questions really in the offseason to answer, really. They did do a good job by bringing back Shaq Barrett, Lavonte David, and Rob Gronkowski. They should really just focus on bringing back guys if they really can, and just covering up any, small holes that they do have on their team and just, trying to keep a good team around Tom Brady. That's really all Tampa Bay has to do in this year's offseason. I also do think they should try and prepare for the future and, use this time to do that. As well, Tom Brady will probably play for another year or two. I do think they can use this time to get a young quarterback and prepare for the future. As well, Tom Brady, don't get me wrong, he is still an amazing player, and I do have to admit I have doubted him a few times, but hey, Tom Brady, he is great. We all know that, but the Buccaneers have to find, a long-term quarterback, because eventually, who knows when it happens, Tom Brady will retire, and what are the Buccaneers really going to do after that? And if you ask me, if they can get a young quarterback to sit behind Tom for 1 or 2 years, and they learn behind Tom Brady, that can be a recipe for success if they do pan out, as Tom Brady, I mean, if you get to learn, behind Tom Brady, you just get to learn you're learning under the greatest player of all time, in my opinion. I mean, I don't really have to explain, why learning under Tom Brady is such a great experience, but that's really what I would like to see the Buccaneers do. Aside from that, getting to the free agency part, they only have $8 million in cap space, but if they were to restructure Cam Brate, they could get $12 million. Now, I don't think they will make any massive free agent splashes, but I do think they can definitely make some moves, and some free agent targets could be Solomon Thomas to, get like a good defensive tackle. Todd Gurley and Mike Davis could be pretty good in case Leonard Fournette does leave. And to wrap up the free agency list, they can improve the secondary a little bit, and Patrick Peterson wasn't exactly good for the Cardinals, but maybe they could take a chance on him. And Brian Poole was also very good for the New York Jets, and maybe they could, add a nice slot corner to that team. But the free agent target list for me is not going to be that high, as the Buccaneers don't have a ton of cap space, and they don't really have a lot of weaknesses on this roster. And I mean, as I said before, they should just focus on bringing guys back, as many guys as they can back, and just improving any weaknesses on the team. Now, as I said before, they won't make the biggest splashes in free agency, but they will also own the 32nd pick in this year's draft. And they are not obviously getting the top prospects. I do not expect that, as, well, they're using the final pick in the first round. But they can definitely get some decent prospects, and I would use that pick on, just to patch up any holes. Maybe you trade out of it, but assuming they don't trade out of it, some draft targets could be Levi Wunzarowski. Yeah, I probably said that wrong, but Levi Wunzarowski. Yeah, I'll just call him Levi. Yeah, I mean, they could go after him. Ifedi Melifonwu could also be pretty good to just help improve the defense as much as he can. Jalen Phillips, if he is available, could be pretty decent, as they are pretty good at the edge spot, but Jason Pierre-Paul is getting old, and if they do want to move on from him at some point, Jalen Phillips could be a nice, player to, take over if they do end up moving on from JPP. Christian Barmore could also be pretty good if he does end up falling to them, as when it comes to the front seven, they're obviously very strong, but the defensive tackle position, it's not exactly the strongest. Plus, Ndamukong Suh is starting to get up there in age. But aside from that, not much else I have to say for the draft targets. And to really wrap up this video, the Buccaneers, they can be good for a few more years, and they should really just do what they can to defend their title. And all I can say is the Buccaneers got a great team. But with that being said, that'll wrap up today's video and this series for the year 2021. I hope you guys really enjoyed today's video and this series. I do plan on doing this next year for every NFL team. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed, as it really helps out the channel. Subscribe if you guys are new and enjoy the content on here, so you do not miss out on any new videos. Plus, we're on the road to 500 subscribers, and once we hit our goal, I will do a reaction to my first 2 videos ever and a Q&A. But with that being said, I'm out, you guys.